Hey everyone, welcome back to RetroBreak. Today I'm going to be doing a comparison between 4 different handheld emulation systems. I've got 2 brand new ones right here, and I've also got 2 that I've done videos on in the past before, the Miyoo Mini Plus and the Anbernic RG351P, I think it's called. Yes, I got it right, 351P. But I also got 2 new ones recently. I got this one here, which is called the Portability X55, which is a sort of PSP Vita style design one, and I also got this one here which is called the RG35XX, which is obviously very similar to the Miyoo Mini Plus. So rather than doing 2 separate reviews on these 2, because they would kind of end up being the same video honestly, instead what I've decided to do is pit all 4 of these head to head against each other in 10 different categories, and then we can actually decide once and for all what is the ultimate budget handheld emulation system. So I really hope you're looking forward to this video. Let's get started. So the first and probably the most important thing to a lot of people with these sort of systems is what are the games that you can actually play on it. So the first category here is supported consoles, and this is actually a fairly easy comparison. So both the Miyoo Mini Plus and the RG35XX can basically play the same games and the same systems. There's a few extra ports that you can get for the Onion operating system, but I think they're also being ported to Garlic. And operating systems is something that I'll come back to a bit later on. But basically with these 2 handhelds here, you can expect to play everything up to PlayStation 1 absolutely flawlessly pretty much. So NES, SNES, Mega Drive, a lot of old arcade systems and a lot of old computers as well, you can actually run really well on these, as well as a few more obscure things like the Pokemon Mini and even Game & Watch titles. So they are very versatile devices despite their small size and cheap price. You can definitely play a good range of systems on these, but not quite as good as the other 2. So out of 5, I'm giving these 2 a 3 out of 5 for supported consoles. Now for the most recent one, the Portability X55, I was actually a little bit disappointed. So in theory, this one can play all the way up to PSP, Dreamcast and Nintendo 64 era. Although I was a little bit disappointed with the final result, a lot of the games that I tried to play on here were quite slow, the frame rate wasn't quite up to scratch as you would expect from playing it on the actual console. There are a lot of tweaks that you can do in RetroArch in the background to try and get them to play a little bit better, but based on the specs for this system, I was actually expecting it to play a lot better than it did. So in terms of supported consoles, I'm going to give this one 1 extra point compared to these 2, but I don't think it runs the games quite as smoothly as the next one, so I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. And then finally the RG351P, which surprisingly, considering it's a few years old, actually plays Dreamcast games better than the Portability one that I've got there. It is missing a few systems. For example, you can't play DS games on it like you can on this one, but playing the DS games on these kind of systems without a touchscreen is kind of weird in the first place, so I can't really give it a point for DS games because, yeah, the majority of them are kind of unplayable. You have to actually use the second analog stick to control the cursor on the touchscreen, which is very strange. And the fact that with Emulation here, there's actually a load of different ports and stuff as well. I actually still think that this console here has the best selection of consoles out of this budget range of devices. Anyway, obviously there's a lot more higher end ones you can get. But out of these budget ones here, I'd have to give the edge to this one, so this one is getting a 5 out of 5 for supported consoles. Now next is a category that's obviously very important for handheld consoles, and that is how portable are these, and I think you can guess the order in which I'm going to arrange these ones, but basically what I'm looking for in a handheld system is something that I can easily slip into my pocket, whether that's in my jeans pocket or in the pocket of my coat or a jumper that I'm wearing, and just take it around with me and just take it out, maybe on the train, maybe in the car. Basically I want something that I can take on the go easily and kind of play a bit discreetly as well. So obviously the winner for this round goes to the Miyoo Mini Plus, so that one's getting 5 points. I guess these 2 are kind of the same. That one's slightly bigger, but this one's actually slightly thinner, so they both feel pretty much the same in the pocket, so I'm giving both of these ones a 4 out of 5. And then obviously the biggest of the bunch, the Portability X55, is a little bit too big for me to actually want to take with me. It's kind of the same issue that I have with the Switch really, and it's why I always prefer to take the 3DS out and about rather than the Switch, because the 3DS or the 3DS XL that I had there can easily slip into the pocket, whereas something this size is just a little bit too big. Like if I put it in my pocket there, you can see that it's kind of sticking out at the top, whereas any of the other ones would easily just be able to, you know, just slip straight into my pocket and I can easily sit down with them. But I'd be a little bit worried about damaging this one, so that one is only getting a 3 out of 5. Now obviously you might expect this one to be the complete opposite of the last one. This one is comfort, and yeah, mostly it's kind of awkward to hold the Miyoo Mini Plus because of how small it is. Your fingers will just kind of fall underneath it and get a bit cramped up, and obviously you have to hold it right to the bottom of the console like that to use the buttons, so it does wear on your hands after a while because they've got nothing to grip onto. So I'm giving the Miyoo Mini Plus a 3. The what's this one called? The 35XX. These names are so confusing and forgettable. So this one, as you can see, is a little bit taller, so it actually fits a lot nicer in your hand. So I'm giving this one a 4 for comfort. There is one thing that's slightly better on the Miyoo Mini Plus, and that is the fact that the shoulder buttons are raised up, but I've very, very rarely had a reason to use L2 or R2, so honestly, it's not that much more effort to use them like that. So I don't really mind either way in terms of the shoulder buttons, but just reaching the face buttons on this one feel a lot more easy to reach and easy to get to. So that one is getting a 4. And I'm also going to give a 4 to this one here, the 351P. And this one obviously is very nice to hold because this is kind of styled after the original Game Boy Advance with its landscape design instead of a portrait design, which is really nice. The buttons are all really easy to get to. The analog sticks are a little bit difficult to get to, but if you move your hands down, then it's still okay. And I really like these rubber grips on the back, and that actually stops it from sliding around on the table too. So I really like this one. This one's getting a 4 as well. But obviously the nicest one to hold is the Portability. Just look how nice that is. It really fits the hands nicely. And if I get a good angle on the screen here, you can actually see that the sides are shaped like an actual gamepad, like a proper controller rather than a handheld. So your fingers can actually rest really nicely on the back there. So it just feels great. It feels really nice. The buttons are all in a great position. Nothing's too far out of the way. So yeah, really can't fault this one. 5 out of 5 for comfort. Now next is build quality, and while none of these are perfect, there are a few standouts. I really love the build quality of the Miyoo Mini Plus. Everything about this just feels premium. It's really nice. It doesn't really rattle much, which is something that I'll come to a bit later on. Like, if I do that, you can't really hear anything. I love the fact that you can actually get to the battery, so if you wanted to replace it in the future, you can take the back off like that, which is a really nice feature that a lot of consoles and handhelds these days just don't have that at all. The triggers on the back feel really nice, and it just feels really well built. Like, it feels sturdy, which is what you want really. And the bezels around the screen, obviously, as well. If it will focus, there we go. The bezels around the screen are like hardly there as well. It's really impressive. It just makes it feel like a premium device, how big the screen is compared to the size of the actual body of the console. So yeah, definitely give this one a 5 out of 5. The second best one I would say for build quality is the Ambernic one here. Again, it's really sturdy, it's really well built. Like I said, I really like these rubber grips on the back. The analog sticks feel, I think they are actually exactly the same as the ones that you get on the Switch and the Switch Lite. So they're really nice. The D-pad and the buttons feel great. Nice clicky triggers on the back, and yeah, just a really solid construction. You can't get to the battery in this one, not easily anyway, unless you have a specific screwdriver to open it up. But that's the only real gripe. Like, it doesn't feel cheap, you can't really bend the plastic or anything, so I'm going to give this one a 4. And then these final two here, I'm actually giving a 3 out of 5. The main reason that I'm giving this one a 3, well, there's two reasons. First of all, it just feels a bit flimsy, and if you listen there, I don't know whether you can hear that or not, but you can hear that the shoulder buttons aren't really locked in place, they're very loose. The D-pad's also quite stiff, but I'll get onto that in the next part. The bezels around the screen are quite a lot bigger, so it makes the whole console feel a bit chunkier and a bit less premium than the Miyoo Mini, but it's only a small gripe, so I'm giving this one a 3. And finally, I am also giving the Portability a 3 as well. The material feels quite cheap, and I really hate the sound that some of the buttons make. Like, They're also extremely difficult to press, especially these ones at the bottom. Can you hear that? You really have to press hard. And something else really weird, they actually put the volume up and down buttons on completely separate sides of the screen and in the opposite direction to what you would expect. So volume down is here on the right and volume up is there on the left. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know why they just didn't put a little volume wheel or some buttons at the top. So that is a very strange omission, but maybe I'm being a little bit harsh because the build quality is quite nice, but it definitely feels the cheapest out of the bunch, even though it's the most expensive. Does that make any sense? Anyway, I'm giving this one a 3 as well. Now we're moving on to the buttons, and it is very slightly different to the build quality, so I decided to make this its own category. In first place, once again, is the Miyoo Mini Plus, mainly because the D-pad on this just feels absolutely perfect. All of the other handhelds have something wrong with the D-pad. It's either too stiff, it's too loose, but this one just feels great, and it doesn't have any issues with diagonals or anything, and it just feels really good in the hand. It actually feels almost identical to the original Game Boy D-pad, which is one of the best, so really can't fault that. And the other face buttons as well feel really nice. They're quite small, obviously, to fit in a small form factor, but they press down just the right amount. They're nice and clicky without being too loud. The start and select buttons are also really nice individual buttons as well, with a nice satisfying click. And the volume button on the side is good too. And obviously the triggers, which I mentioned earlier, are really nice. The only downside that I have on this for the buttons, and that also goes with the rest of them as well, I don't like the fact that none of them have an actual on and off switch. They all have buttons you either have to press or hold down, and it makes it really difficult to know whether I'm putting the system on sleep or turning it off completely. So sometimes you can press it down, nothing happens. Sometimes you can press it down a little bit longer and then the light will switch on, and then it will load up again from scratch, or sometimes if you don't hold it down quite as long, it will just boot straight back up to where you were. So that's an issue with all of these, so I can't knock this one down specifically. So I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5 for buttons, because apart from the power button, everything else about it is just perfect. Now for the RG35XX, I'm actually giving this one a 4. It's very similar. The buttons on the face are actually slightly bigger, but they're also a little bit harder to press. But the main issue I have with this is the fact that the D-pad doesn't feel anywhere near as nice as the one on the Miyoo Mini Plus. The triggers on the back are also quite loud as well. And I don't really like having loud buttons because I like to play these consoles in bed, and I don't want to wake anyone up by playing a console with really, really loud buttons. So I'm giving this one a 4. And as well as that, I'm also giving this one here a 4 as well, the 351P. The buttons are actually quite soft, they're quite squidgy to press down, and the D-pad, although it's not terrible, isn't really the best. I'd say this is probably the second best D-pad after the Miyoo Mini Plus, but the main thing that lets this one down is the really clicky and really small dual triggers on the back, so I really don't like them at all, and listen to how loud they are. So yeah, if you're being anywhere quiet, you cannot play this one and use the triggers. And finally, I'm giving the Powkiddy a 3. First of all, I don't really like the D-pad. I like the size of it, but I don't like its position at the bottom. It kind of gives me 3DS hand cramp vibes. And obviously, most of the games you'll be playing on this, you use the D-pad rather than the analog stick. Considering a lot of the games that use the analog stick don't even run at full speed on here, so there's not really that many chances that you would actually get to use this. So I think the D-pad should have been at the top, and I think they should have done a better job with it too. The face buttons are actually spaced out quite far, so it kind of feels a bit weird with your thumb. You can actually put your entire thumb in the middle of them, and like I said, I really hate how loud and stiff, as you can hear that, how loud and stiff these start, select and volume buttons are, and the triggers at the top are even louder. Listen to them. And they actually feel quite cheap as well. I like the fact that the R2 buttons are underneath, and the fact that they're a bit bigger. It's quite nice in the hand, but yeah. You cannot play this game somewhere quiet. You cannot play this console somewhere quiet. It's just way too loud. I do like the analog sticks though. Again, they're exactly the same as the ones that are on the Switch, so I'm guessing they're identical to these ones. Yeah, they look basically the same. I think they are the same stick actually. They even have the same long grooves on them, so yeah. Really good sticks, but yeah, the buttons on them too aren't the best, so I'm giving the Powkiddy a 3 out of 5. Now for the specs, and I was a little bit surprised when I was looking these up, so I'm just going to rank these based on the highest to lowest in terms of raw specs. So let's start with the Miu Mini Plus here. This one contains a Cortex A7 ARM processor running at 1.2 GHz with 128 megabytes of DDR3 RAM and no GPU at all. That really surprised me. So obviously this one is the weakest of the bunch, so this one gets a 2 in terms of specs. The second weakest, surprisingly, considering this one can actually play more consoles than the RG35XX. This one here is actually the second weakest. This one sports an RK3326 quad-core 1.5 GHz CPU with a GPU which is a Mali G31 MP2, and it also has 1 gig of DDR3 RAM, so quite low specs considering the systems that this one can actually run, especially considering the fact that it actually ran some better than the Powkiddy, which actually has the best specs. So strangely, this one is in second place in terms of specs, so this one gets a 3 out of 5. Then the second most powerful is actually the 35XX here. This one supports a quad-core ARM Cortex A9 CPU and a quad-core PowerVR SGX 544MP GPU, if that means anything to you. And it also has 256 gig of DDR3 RAM. Although, in practice, I can't really tell a difference between these two, even though this one is way more powerful. Maybe it helps out on some PlayStation 1 games, I'm not entirely sure. And then in first place is the Powkiddy X55 with an RK3566 quad-core ARM Cortex A55 CPU running at 1.8 GHz and an ARM Mali G52 GPU and 2 gig of LPDDR4X RAM. So this one is way more powerful than the others, even though the games don't actually play that well on it, which is very strange. But hopefully all those issues with it can be fixed in the future, because this version that I've got here is still running the stock firmware because it's not been officially released yet. So the fans obviously haven't had chance to try and port any of the more custom firmware that actually runs things a lot better. So fingers crossed this one improves a lot in the future, but for now, this one, although it's got the best specs, it actually has some of the worst performance, which is very strange. But anyway, in terms of raw specs and in terms of future potential, this one does get a 5 out of 5. Now screen quality next, and I'm going to rate this based on just what I see with my own eyes and not specifically the specs of the screen itself. So let's start with the worst one and work our way up. So the worst screen out of the bunch, I think personally, is this one here on the Anbernic RG351P. It's not a terrible screen, but the aspect ratio isn't really ideal for a lot of the games that you would want to play on this. It is perfect for Game Boy Advance games, but any other retro system, you're obviously either going to have big black borders down the side or it's going to crop in a bit. And the screen's a little bit too small for things like Dreamcast or N64 to really feel good on this sort of device. So, and as well, it's also quite a low resolution. I don't know whether you can actually see the quality of the screen itself, but just reading the text and things on there isn't really the best experience. It does get quite bright though, and like I said, for GBA games in particular, it does look really nice. So I'm not exactly going to give this one a bad score. I would give this one a 3 out of 5. And if you were curious, this one does actually have the lowest resolution out of the bunch. This has a 320 by 480 resolution screen, and it is 3.5 inches and it's an IPS panel, so at least the viewing angles are really nice on it. Now next is the X55, and I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5. It's a really nice screen. Obviously it's a lot bigger than a lot of the other ones, and the resolution is a lot better as well. It's actually 720p, which is really impressive for this size of console. And as you can see there, I was playing ActRaiser on the SNES, and it's so smooth and it's just so crisp. The only downside I actually have with this screen is the fact that the viewing angles aren't great. You probably can't pick it up too well on camera, but the colours do change quite a lot depending on how you're looking at it. It makes it feel kind of cheap, and you can also see the light bleed coming in from the side as well. It's not something that really picks up on camera, but when it's right up to your face, it is quite noticeable. So that is why it's only getting a 4 out of 5 and not a perfect 5. But apart from that, it is really nice, especially on games on systems like the PSP or other widescreen things like Game Boy Advance as well. They look really, really nice on this screen. And then actually the 35XX and the Miu Mini Plus have exactly the same screen, and they are by far some of the best screens that I've ever seen in any handheld, honestly. The resolution is perfect for the kind of games that it plays. It's actually got a 640 by 480 resolution screen, which is just perfect. And it upscales the 240p games perfectly as well. And with their 4:3 aspect ratios, it plays retro games just absolutely fantastically. There's also a range of different options in the RetroArch menu to smooth out or retain the same pixels and add different filters and stuff. Same across the board, but they look especially nice on these two, so I'm giving these two a 5 out of 5. Now next is battery life, and in order from worst to best, in last place is the Powkiddy X55, obviously with this really nice 720p screen and really big and bright display. That hampers the battery life a lot, as does the very impressive specs inside, even if you can't really put them to use yet. So you can only really expect about 4 hours of playtime out of this system, unfortunately. So I'm giving battery a 2 out of 10. 4 isn't awful, but it's definitely a lot less than what you would really ideally hope for on a system like this. And then in second to last place is a 35XX. And there's actually two different versions of batteries that you can get in this. This is the newer model, which has a 2600 milliamp hour battery, but there was also a model before that which only had a 2100 milliamp battery, which was even worse. So depending on the model, you can either get 4 or 5 hours of playtime, which isn't great, but it's also not terrible again. So this one I'm giving a 3 out of 5. Surprisingly, the Miyoo Mini, with its worst specs, actually has a bigger and better battery. You can see on the back there, it's actually got a 3000 milliamp hour battery. And with that, you can actually expect around 7 hours of playtime out of it, which is fantastic for a device this size. In fact, I guess most of the device is the battery. Look how much of space it takes up. And then in first place, so I'm giving that one a 4 out of 5, by the way. And then in first place is the RG351P, which actually gets around 8 hours of battery, which is really impressive for something this size. And that is a 3500 milliamp hour battery as well, which is even slightly bigger than the Miyoo Mini Plus. Next is extras, and this is a really interesting category because I actually wasn't expecting a lot of these features from these systems. So there's a few really interesting things that these can do, apart from just the ability to play these awesome games. So let's start with the Miyoo Mini Plus. This one actually features Rumble inside, which is really cool, and I wasn't expecting that. So for any games that support Rumble, like the Game Boy Color, Pokemon Pinball, for example, you can feel it on this, as well as things like the Pokemon Mini or any GBA Rumble compatible games like Drill Dozer. It actually feels really good too. And there's also Wi-Fi built into this as well, and apparently you can link that with something called Retro Achievements, which I haven't actually tried yet, but it sounds like a really cool thing to try and get set up and get up and running. So in terms of extras, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 because they were just some really cool little features, so definitely giving this one a 4 out of 5. Now the 35XX doesn't have Rumble as far as I'm aware, but it does have even more really interesting features which actually elevate it slightly above the Mini Plus for me personally. The first of which I was very excited about, was actually the fact that it's got a HDMI out port on the top. So you can actually record games off this straight onto the computer or actually play them on the TV, which is just really cool. I wish more handhelds had that ability. I even got my 3DS modded to be able to do that, and that was very expensive. So to get it built in for free is just a really cool feature. Another really nice feature is the fact that it actually has 2 micro SD card slots. So you can have one for the operating system, and then you can have a separate one just for all of your ROMs, and you can even transfer ROMs from the Miyoo Plus and put them straight in here, and it will actually boot up the exact same list of games without you needing to do anything in the back end, which is really cool. So I've actually been swapping this card between the two systems because I can't actually decide which one I want to keep as my main retro handheld, so I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5 for extras. Then the Powkiddy here actually has exactly the same features as the 35XX, so you've got your dual card slots on the bottom here, and you've got your HDMI out port on the top, which is fantastic. So again, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5. And last but not least is the old Ambernick, and this one doesn't really have any interesting features outside of just being able to play the games. It does support Wi-Fi, but you actually need to get a USB-C attachment for it to be able to do so. So I'm giving this one a 3. And then the final category which I've come up with here is value for money. So I think that's something that's really important for a lot of people, especially for these budget range of handhelds. Obviously you can get way more expensive ones in the handheld PC arena. But in terms of these ones here, I definitely have to give the edge to the 35XX just in terms of price to performance. So it's the cheapest of the bunch at only $69, and it actually does a lot more than some of the more expensive ones here. And it's just an all-round, really great console, really well built, and for the price you really can't get better than this. So 5 out of 5 for this one. And honestly, for the price that they're going through, all of these other three are kind of equal in terms of value for money. So obviously the Mii U Mini is slightly more expensive than the 3.5 and can play the same games, but you also get a slightly better build quality and a smaller form factor and a kind of nicer button layout and stuff. So I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5. And I'm also giving the other two a 4 out of 5 as well. This one's gone down in price quite a lot, so you can get this one for around $100. And obviously this one is slightly more expensive, but it's also a lot newer, and it is a lot bigger, and it's a lot nicer to hold, and it's a lot more comfortable, and the screen's a lot nicer too, so I'm also giving this one a 4 as well. And so that is all the scores, so let me go ahead and add all these up, and from worst to best, in last place we have the Powkiddy X55 with a score of 38 out of 50, so by no means terrible, but out of this lot here, considering it's most expensive and considering what it should be able to do, it did let it down in this personal test here. But obviously your mileage may vary, and maybe very soon there'll be an update and that might bump it up a notch or two on my leaderboard. So for now, Powkiddy X55 is in last place, but I still recommend it if you like a nice big handheld that's cheap but also kind of powerful and really comfortable to hold as well. So if you want this, check in the description below for an affiliate link to Mech DIY to pick this one up. In fourth place with a score of 39 out of 50 is the Anbernic RG351P. I did a video review on this one back when I got it a few years ago, so go ahead and watch that if you want to know more about it. But yeah, 39 out of 50, it's pretty good. Definitely recommend it still, although it doesn't quite hold up to some of the newer handhelds that are out there today, but I really did enjoy it for a number of years, so it is still a very high recommendation for the price. And surprisingly, adding all these up, and this doesn't really help me at all either, because I was hoping to make this video and actually pick which one of these I want to make as my go-to retro handheld, but these actually both got 40 out of 50, so I really can't decide between the two. Let me know down in the comments below whether you think the Mii U Mini Plus or the RG35XX is the better handheld. I honestly put them on even footing. I think I might be slightly leaning towards the Mii U Mini Plus for the better battery life and the nicer buttons, but this one does have a few extra features that I really like as well, like the HDMI out, so it is a really difficult toss-up. And like the Powkiddy, you can actually buy both of these right now over on Mech DIY's website, and they were actually very kind to send me all three of these systems, but they did not ask me to say anything about these. These are just my personal opinions on all this. So anyway, that is it. Thank you very much for watching. That was a very long video. I hope you got some good information and entertainment out of this. Let me know down in the comments below which one you think is the best, and if you want to find out more about these, go ahead and check out my video review on the Mii U Mini Plus up here, and if you enjoyed this, go and join Patreon, and I'll see you all again very soon for the next episode. Goodbye.